Good evening, everyone. This is Ainsworth, and today I want to walk you through one of the most misunderstood relationships in all of metabolic science, and that is the relationship between what happens in the 3 hours before you close your eyes and how much fat ends up wrapped around your liver, your intestines, and the rest of your internal organs by the time you wake up. Before you dismiss this as another sleep hygiene lecture, I need you to understand something. You can hold food intake constant, you can hold total calories constant, you can hold exercise constant, and two people can still walk away with meaningfully different amounts of visceral fat, which is the fat that gathers around the organs rather than under the skin. The only variable that changed is what each of them did after 8 o'clock at night. So today, I am going to walk you through this hour by hour. What is happening to your cortisol? What is happening to your insulin sensitivity? What is happening inside the fat cell itself at the level of gene expression? And by the end of this, you are going to understand why the phrase "you are what you eat" is incomplete. You are what you eat at the time you eat it, in the state your nervous system is in when you eat it. But before we begin, if you are new to my channel, hit subscribe right now and turn on the bell icon. Because this is what I do. I take the real science, the actual mechanisms, the physiology that matters, and I deliver it to you in a way that allows you to make informed decisions rather than relying on whatever happens to be trending this month. Now, why the evening specifically? Why not simply track calories across a full 24-hour period and stop worrying about the clock entirely? That question is exactly the one that most surface-level advice gets wrong because it treats the body as though it runs on a single flat rulebook from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. It does not. Your body runs a day shift and a night shift, and the two shifts operate under completely different hormonal instructions. During the day, particularly in the hours after waking, insulin sensitivity is elevated, cortisol is near its peak and doing exactly what it should be doing, which is mobilizing energy for activity, and your peripheral tissues, meaning your muscle and your liver, are primed to take up glucose efficiently and put it to use. As the evening progresses, that entire orchestration shifts. Insulin sensitivity in your muscle and liver declines, not because anything is malfunctioning, but because your circadian clock is deliberately down-regulating glucose disposal in preparation for a period with no expected food intake. Melatonin begins to rise, and melatonin itself has a direct suppressive effect on insulin secretion from the pancreas. So the same plate of food, the identical carbohydrate and fat content, is handled by a completely different hormonal environment depending on whether your body considers it daytime rules or nighttime rules. That is the entire principle underneath everything I am about to show you. The body does not care what time your watch says it is. It cares what time your internal clock says it is, and when those two clocks disagree, which happens constantly in modern life, the metabolic consequences land almost entirely in one place, and that place is your visceral fat compartment. Because visceral adipose tissue is unusually rich in glucocorticoid receptors and unusually responsive to exactly the hormonal signals that get thrown out of alignment at night. If you are still with me, go ahead and comment below the word clock. I want to know how many of you have suspected, on some level, that your evenings were working against you without ever having the actual mechanism explained to you, because what I am about to walk you through next is the study that made researchers in this field sit up and pay attention. Before I get into the first mechanism, I want to mention something that directly complements everything we are covering today. My ebook on metabolic fat loss takes this exact science, the cortisol curve, the insulin sensitivity shift, the visceral fat gene expression changes, and organizes all of it into a complete protocol with daily schedules, meal timing windows, food pairing guidance, and printable tracking sheets. If you want the structured version of everything you are about to learn today, the link is in the comments below. Check it out once you finish this lecture. Now let us move into the first mechanism, which is simply this: not sleeping enough. I want to be precise here because precision matters. This is not about feeling tired the next day. That is the least interesting consequence of sleep restriction. The consequence I want you to understand happens at the level of your endocrine system, specifically your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, which is the system that governs your cortisol output, and your growth hormone pulse, which is largely tied to the deepest stage of your sleep architecture, called slow-wave sleep. Here is what happens when that window gets compressed. Growth hormone is released in a large, concentrated pulse during slow-wave sleep. And think of that pulse as the overnight maintenance crew arriving to do the actual work, one of its primary jobs being to encourage lipolysis, meaning the breakdown of stored fat for fuel while you are not eating. Shorten the sleep window, and the maintenance crew shows up late, works a shortened shift, or in some cases barely shows up at all. Less growth hormone released overnight means less lipolytic signaling, which means your fat cells default towards storage rather than release during exactly the hours when they should be doing the opposite. At the same time, your cortisol rhythm, which is supposed to decline through the evening and stay low through the first half of the night, stays elevated for longer when sleep is restricted. And sustained elevated cortisol does something very specific to visceral fat cells that it does not do nearly as strongly to fat under your skin. Visceral adipocytes carry a disproportionately high density of cortisol receptors, so when cortisol lingers, visceral fat tissue receives a louder, more sustained storage signal than fat anywhere else on your body. Eve Van Cauter's foundational work on sleep restriction and metabolism, some of the most cited research in this entire field, demonstrated that even a few nights of restricted sleep in otherwise healthy young adults produces measurable insulin resistance, the kind you would normally only see develop over years of poor metabolic health. Her protocols were not identical to the specific trial I am about to describe to you, and I want to be transparent about that distinction, but the underlying mechanism she identified, meaning that curtailed sleep degrades glucose handling almost immediately, is the same mechanism operating in the study I want to walk you through now. Researchers running a controlled trial in healthy, lean young adults had one group sleep 4 hours a night and another group sleep 9 hours a night for 2 full weeks, inside a lab setting where food intake was tightly controlled and identical between groups. After those 2 weeks, imaging showed the sleep-restricted group had accumulated substantially more visceral fat, on the order of an 11% increase, specifically around the organs, while body weight on the scale barely moved at all, often less than a single pound. Let me say that part again, because it is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The scale said almost nothing changed. The scan said something changed a great deal. And that gap between what the scale reports and what is actually accumulating around your organs is precisely why this entire category of fat gain goes undetected for years in otherwise healthy-looking people, not because their willpower failed, because their growth hormone pulse was blunted and their cortisol curve stayed elevated for 2 extra hours every single night, and their fat cells simply followed the hormonal instructions they were given. Tell me, have you ever noticed your midsection looking or feeling puffier after a stretch of bad sleep, even when the scale told you nothing had changed? Comment below and let me know, because I want to understand how many of you have felt this exact disconnect between what you saw in the mirror and what your scale reported. Now, what is the fix? And I want to give you the mechanistic version, not just the instruction. The target is not 8 hours in bed. The target is 7 to 8 hours of actual continuous sleep, which for most people requires closer to 8.5 hours in bed once you account for the time it takes to fall asleep and the inevitable brief awakenings through the night. And here is the single highest leverage change you can make tonight. Set an alarm for your bedtime, not just your wake time. The instruction that tells your body when to stop is, in practice, far more powerful than the instruction that tells it when to start, because almost everyone already has a wake-up alarm, and almost no one has anything governing when the day actually ends. If you are finding this lecture valuable, subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell icon now, because what I am about to explain next connects directly to something almost nobody associates with belly fat at all, which is the exact minute you sit down to eat dinner. Now let us move into the second mechanism, which operates through a completely different pathway than sleep restriction, and that is late-day eating and what it does to gene expression inside your fat cells themselves. I must be transparent here. This is not simply about digestion running slower at night, which is the explanation most people have already heard, and which is frankly an incomplete one. The real mechanism operates at the level of your circadian clock genes, specifically genes with names like BMAL1, clock PER, and CRY, which exist not only in your brain but inside almost every cell in your body, including your adipocytes, your fat cells. Think of these peripheral clock genes as a small control room sitting inside every fat cell, and hour by hour, that control room is flipping a switch that biases the cell towards storing incoming lipids or releasing stored ones, and that switch position shifts measurably as the day progresses, becoming more storage-oriented as your endogenous melatonin begins its evening rise. Frank Shear's research group, working out of Brigham and Women's Hospital, has spent years demonstrating exactly how powerfully meal timing interacts with this circadian machinery, independent of what is actually being eaten. And a tightly controlled crossover study, meaning the same individuals ate the identical meals on separate occasions, once earlier in the day and once several hours later, isolated this effect almost perfectly. Same people, same food, same total calories. The only variable that moved was the clock. When the meal was eaten late, three things happened simultaneously that did not happen with the identical early meal. Reported hunger the following day increased. Total energy expenditure across the following waking hours was measurably lower. And, this is the detail that should stop you, gene expression profiles taken from fat tissue samples shifted toward a more lipogenic, more fat-storing pattern. If you're enjoying the lecture so far, please do give me a quick thumbs up on this session and hype this video so others can also benefit from it. This is not willpower failing. This is not a character flaw showing up at 9 at night. This is your adipose tissue receiving a different set of genetic instructions depending purely on the clock position at which the food arrived, and your fat cells following those instructions with complete biochemical obedience. I do want to be precise about what this does not mean. It does not mean dinner is the enemy, and it does not mean you need to stop eating in the evening entirely. What it means is that the same meal, moved 2 to 3 hours earlier, is quite literally handled by a different genetic program inside your fat tissue than that exact meal eaten right before bed. The fix is not deprivation, the fix is positioning. Close your true eating window 2 to 3 hours before you intend to sleep. And if a smaller, lighter version of that meal is what fits your evening, you are giving your adipose tissue the earlier, more favorable set of genetic instructions instead of the later one. Before we move into the third mechanism, and I promise you this next one might be the most underestimated of everything I am covering today, I want you to think about what you personally do in the 10 minutes immediately after your last bite of food. Because that single behavior, more than almost anything else in this entire lecture, determines whether the calories you just ate get oxidized or get filed away around your organs. And that is exactly where we are headed next. Have you ever noticed that heavy, almost sluggish feeling when you sit straight down on the couch right after a big meal, versus the completely different feeling when you happen to stay on your feet for even 10 minutes afterward? Comment below and tell me which one describes your typical evening, because the mechanism behind that feeling is exactly where we are headed now. If you're enjoying the lecture so far, please do give me a quick thumbs up on this session and hype this video so others can also benefit from it. Now let us move into the third mechanism, and this is the one that has nothing to do with what you ate or how long you slept, and everything to do with what you did in the 10 minutes immediately afterward. I want to be precise here because precision matters. Eating late is one variable. Lying down immediately after eating late is a second separate variable, and the two compound each other rather than simply adding together. Here is why. Melatonin has a specific onset time each evening, referred to in the research as the dim light melatonin onset. And once that onset begins, your body's capacity to oxidize, meaning actually burn, fat as fuel measurably declines. Melatonin and insulin already work against each other, and layering food on top of a rising melatonin signal asks your body to digest and store at almost the exact moment it is biologically least equipped to burn. Now add inactivity on top of that. Skeletal muscle, particularly the large muscles in your legs, is one of the most metabolically active tissues you have, and simple postural activity, meaning standing, walking, and mild isometric loading, keeps the enzyme responsible for clearing fat from your bloodstream, lipoprotein lipase, active in your muscle tissue. Sit down immediately after eating, and that enzyme activity drops. Stand up, walk, or even hold a wall sit for a minute or two, and it stays elevated. This is not about burning meaningful calories through the walk itself. It is about keeping the metabolic machinery switched on during the exact window when your blood is full of fuel that needs somewhere useful to go. Think of it less like exercise and more like keeping an engine idling instead of switching it off entirely. An engine that stays idling restarts instantly. An engine you shut off completely takes real energy to bring back online. Your metabolism behaves the same way after a meal. 10 minutes on your feet, doing dishes, walking the block, holding a wall sit, keeps the engine idling. Sitting down and going horizontal shuts it off completely, right at the moment your bloodstream is asking it to do the opposite. Before I get into the next mechanism, I do want to mention that this exact protocol, the specific movement windows, how long to stay upright, what kind of light activity produces the biggest lipoprotein lipase response, is laid out in full inside my ebook on metabolic fat loss, along with the meal timing windows we covered earlier. If you want the exact structured version of tonight's routine rather than piecing it together yourself, the link is in the comments below. And if this is the first time you are hearing the actual mechanism behind do not lie down right after you eat, instead of just being told the rule, that is exactly the kind of depth I deliver every single week on this channel, so go ahead and subscribe now and turn the bell on so you do not miss the next one. Now let us move into the fourth mechanism, and this one is not about any single night at all. It is about the consistency or the inconsistency of your sleep and wake times across the whole week. I must be transparent here. Your total sleep hours matter, but they are not the only variable your body is tracking. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock sitting in your hypothalamus, is only one part of the system. Nearly every organ in your body, your liver, your pancreas, your fat tissue, runs its own peripheral clock, and those peripheral clocks take their timing cues from your master clock. When your sleep and wake times shift around, a bit earlier some nights, several hours later on weekends, your master clock receives a blurred, inconsistent signal, and it passes that same blurred signal down to your peripheral clocks. Researchers refer to this pattern, going to bed and waking up at meaningfully different times across the week, as social jet lag, and the term is fitting, because the metabolic consequence resembles actual jet lag even though you never left your own bed. Here's the part that catches most people off guard. This has nothing to do with total hours slept. You can average a completely respectable 7 hours a night and still carry a meaningful social jet lag burden if those 7 hours land at wildly different clock times from one night to the next. And when your peripheral clocks, specifically the ones in your liver and your adipose tissue, receive that inconsistent signal, insulin sensitivity and lipid handling in those tissues genuinely destabilize, independent of how much sleep you are getting on average. Comment below and tell me honestly, does your weekend wake time differ from your weekday wake time by more than an hour? I ask because that single number predicts more about your metabolic health than most people would ever guess. If your protocol needs a way to actually track this kind of consistency night over night rather than guessing at it, that is precisely what the tracking sheets inside my ebook on metabolic fat loss are built for. So check the link in the comments if that is something you have been missing. If the idea that your weekends might quietly be undoing your weekdays is new information to you, that is exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe and turn on the bell icon so the next mechanism like this one does not slip past you. If you're enjoying the lecture so far, please do give me a quick thumbs up on this session and hype this video so others can also benefit from it. Now let us move into the fifth mechanism, and I promised you earlier this might be the most underestimated of all of them, and here is why. Quickly before I get into it, this exact wind-down sequence, the fixed cutoff time, what to do instead of scrolling, how to handle it if you share a bedroom with someone on a different schedule, is one of the more detailed sections inside my ebook on metabolic fat loss. So keep that link in mind as we go. On its own, looking at a phone screen does not deposit a single gram of fat around your organs, but it is the lever that pulls every other mechanism we have discussed tonight out of alignment simultaneously. Let me be completely honest about this. The conversation about phones and sleep almost always gets reduced to blue light, and blue light is real, it does suppress melatonin, but it is not actually the dominant factor. Overall light intensity, meaning total lumens hitting your retina, has a larger suppressive effect on melatonin than wavelength alone. A bright phone screen held close to your face in an otherwise dark room delivers a disproportionately large light dose directly to your eyes, and that dose delays the dim light melatonin onset we discussed earlier, which pushes back the entire cascade. Here is the cascade laid out plainly. A delayed melatonin onset delays your actual sleep onset, which shortens the truly restorative window and blunts the growth hormone pulse from mechanism 1. It also compresses the runway between your last meal and lights out, making the 2 to 3 hour buffer from mechanism 2 harder to hit. And because scrolling in bed rarely happens at a fixed time, night to night, it is frequently the single largest contributor to the social jet lag we just discussed in mechanism 4. One behavior, 4 mechanisms destabilized simultaneously. That is what makes it the most underestimated habit on this entire list. And you are essentially unaware of all of this while it is happening, because from the inside it just feels like harmless relaxation before sleep. The fix here is not eliminating your phone from your life. It is a hard stop at a fixed time, the device physically leaving the room, ideally charging somewhere else entirely, and the bedroom itself being reserved almost exclusively for sleep. If you are finding that this lecture is giving you a genuinely more precise understanding of why this specific habit matters more than people give it credit for, share it with someone who scrolls in bed every single night without knowing what it is actually doing to their cortisol, their gene expression, and their sleep consistency all at once. Comment below and be honest with me. Have you ever tried to fix your sleep schedule on its own without ever touching the phone habit underneath it and wondered why it never actually stuck? Now you know why. Now let me address something that is critically important, which is how you actually implement all 4 of these fixes without overhauling your entire life overnight. Because attempting all 4 simultaneously is the single most common reason people abandon this within a week. Before I walk you through the sequencing, I want to be clear that the complete version of this rollout, including the exact tracking sheets I use to keep clients honest about their own consistency, is inside my ebook on metabolic fat loss, and the link sits in the comments below if you want the structured version rather than reconstructing it from memory after this video ends. Start with the phone. For the first stretch, your only job is picking a fixed hour, moving the device out of the bedroom entirely, and holding that line every single night. This one change, on its own, begins repairing your sleep consistency and your total sleep time simultaneously because it removes the lever that was destabilizing both. Once that is genuinely automatic, add the eating window. Close your last real meal 2 to 3 hours before your target bedtime, and build in 10 minutes of light movement immediately afterward, whether that is a short walk, standing while you finish the dishes, or a couple of minutes in a wall sit. From there, lock the clock itself. Choose a sleep and awake time and hold both within roughly an hour of each other every day, weekends included, and get a few minutes of natural light exposure in the morning and again around sunset, because outdoor light is a far stronger signal to your master clock than any indoor lighting you have access to. The exact light exposure windows I recommend by season are mapped out in the ebook as well, so if you want the specifics rather than a rough estimate, that link in the comments has you covered. Do these in that order, one edition at a time, and by the time all 3 are running together, you are no longer managing 4 separate problems. You are managing one system because every one of these levers reinforces the other 3. Comment below and tell me which one of these 4 you already suspect is your weakest link, because I guarantee you already know the answer before you finish typing it. If you are planning to actually start with step 1 tonight, drop the word ready in the comments so I know it is not just me talking to myself here. Now, I also must be completely honest about who should approach this differently or should not attempt to self-implement significant changes to sleep timing or meal timing at all. If you are pregnant or breastfeeding, your nutritional and sleep needs are already individualized, and any structured eating window change should go through your own physician rather than a general protocol. If you have a diagnosed sleep disorder, including sleep apnea or clinical insomnia, restricting your time in bed on your own, even with the best intentions, can worsen daytime function, and that needs to be managed with a sleep specialist, not with a bedtime alarm you set yourself. If you have any history of disordered eating, changes to eating windows, however reasonable they sound, can be genuinely destabilizing, and that work belongs with a qualified professional who knows your history, not with a video on the internet. If you have an endocrine condition that affects cortisol regulation directly, such as Cushing's syndrome or adrenal insufficiency, or if you are on insulin or an insulin secretagogue medication where shifting your meal timing could meaningfully increase your risk of low blood sugar, You need individualized medical guidance before changing anything here. And if your work involves rotating or overnight shifts, your circadian exposure is already atypical in ways a fixed bedtime rule does not account for, and you need an individualized approach rather than the general version I laid out tonight. And if you do fall into one of the categories I just named, the ebook includes notes on which pieces of this framework are generally considered lower risk and which ones you should bring to your own physician before adjusting, precisely because I would rather you ask that question than guess at it. For the large majority of you who are otherwise healthy adults dealing with an ordinary modern evening, phone in hand, dinner running late, weekend sleep drifting all over the place, everything I walked you through tonight is safe, well supported by the mechanisms we covered, and more importantly, genuinely fixable starting tonight. So tell me in the comments, out of everything I covered, sleep restriction, late eating, post-meal inactivity, inconsistent timing, or the phone itself, which one is honestly your biggest offender? Because I read every single one of these and I am curious just how many of you land on the same answer. And now if tonight's lecture gave you a level of science explanation you have not gotten anywhere else on this exact topic, do me a favor and subscribe, turn on the bell icon, and share this with the one person in your life who insists their weight gain makes no sense given how little they actually eat, because this is very likely the missing piece. And now for the complete version of everything I covered tonight, organized into an actual structured daily plan rather than 5 separate ideas to remember on your own. My ebook on metabolic fat loss takes the cortisol curve, the meal timing windows, the post-meal movement protocol, and the consistency tracking we discussed, and turns all of it into a full 30-day framework with daily schedules and printable tracking sheets built in. The link is in the comments below. Check it out today because the gap between understanding this mechanism and actually living it consistently, night after night, is where most people quietly lose their progress, and that ebook exists specifically to close that gap. If you have watched my full lecture today, I must genuinely salute your attention. Please go ahead right now in the comment section and tell me which of the 3 parts surprised you most and which one you are starting with tomorrow. I genuinely want to hear from you, and your comment helps someone else in the community recognize the same pattern and take action.